please join me in welcoming our host to the stage, Jacqueline Whittall.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Hub Live. I'm your host, meteorologist Jacqueline Whittall, climate change journalist from the Weather Network in Canada, and yes, I am the storm chaser. I had a lot of questions last night at the reception about whether Twisters is a good depiction of storm chasing, and it is, so I endorse the movie. But it's great to be with you again today and introduce our third and our flagship session focused squarely on unleashing the power of innovation and technology to thwart the climate crisis. Today, we're standing at a crossroads where policy and innovation are beginning to converge in a way that could transform our path toward a net zero future. With landmark initiatives like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the Green Deal Industrial Plan in Europe, we're witnessing a green subsidy race in the global north. And let's not forget China's rapid acceleration in green tech investment and electric vehicle deployment, which is reshaping the global energy landscape. So what does it all mean? Well, it means that clean technology, innovation, and bold leadership are poised to play a critical role in the race to decarbonize. But the real test lies ahead. It's not just about setting policies or creating new technologies. It's about making them work at scale in every corner of the world and ensuring that this green transition is as equitable as it is effective. The challenge is enormous, but so is the opportunity. As we look to the future, we'll be discussing how we can harness the multiplier effect of clean technology and how it can help us stay aligned with the 1.5 degrees pathway and bring sustainable, scalable solutions to countries and corporations alike. Today's conversations will focus on the power of innovation, policy leadership, and technology to make net zero not just a goal, but a reality. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our first panel to the stage with a focus on blue sky thinking on climate change, climate leadership rather, policy and partnerships. Please join me in welcoming Lawrence Breton, the Managing Director of European Climate Foundation, and Vinay Shandell, who is also a Canadian, woohoo, Managing Director and Senior Partner of Boston Consulting Group, and our moderator, Dr. Champa Patel, the Executive Director of Government and Policy for Climate Group. Put your hands together.
Thank you for the introduction, Jacqueline, and I'm really pleased to be moderating this panel and to see so many of you first thing in the morning. I know this is a hectic week, so it's great to see people are still persevering and pushing through. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the key issues we're here to address. Laurence, if I may come to you first. As we reflect on the changes since the Paris Agreement, it's clear that the world is taking seriously the need to accelerate climate action. Yet at the same time, what we see is that there is an increase in extreme weather-related events, whether that's droughts, wildfires, heat waves. There's still so much more to be done. It's clear that we need to go beyond the norm. What do you think is the importance of the European leadership in this space, and how do you see that evolving to meet the challenges that we have?
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. That's a really tough question to start with. Europe is a really critical moment. It's managed to actually keep consistency in the kind of ambition, and with successful Green Deal and many policies like the Nature Restoration Law, the ban of fossil cars, has achieved a lot of decisions. But now, if I may say, we're entering a war ecology. So, and we'll hit the reality of the economy, the cost of living, the cost of defense. So the path is really narrow, and Europe leadership will lie, and we see like the move of the new European Commission to move towards the clean industrial technology for Europe. So that's really critical to link the climate with the economy for the sake of job, but also for the sake of the cost of living. So that's going to be an instrumental moment, and of course, like not to do that for Europe only, because it's super important to have in mind that Europe is the first like major trade partner to 80 countries, where the US is only with 20 countries, which means like whatever Europe is going to do will have tremendous impact. So I would say that's a major moment. And I thought that there were questions this morning about really breakthrough and innovative leadership. So if I may,
Yes, please.
what I hope for Europe and for the rest of the world is 3 words for the leadership. The first one is obvious one is courage, because there will be really tough decision against strong lobby. The second one is a lot of collaboration and diplomacy. There will be, and as a foundation, we'll make sure like the civil society is bring at the table and has the agency and the political role it should play. But that will take a lot internally in the European Parliament. There will be a lot of transaction conversation to make sure like the policies are implementing and worldwide, and we know all the kind of geopolitical headwinds. And maybe the last one, the most important one and the less obvious one is caring. Because what we see is inclusion is instrumental to increase the outcomes. We need to, the conversation to take the most vulnerable. You were talking about some climate event. People living in rural areas, people living in the more like suburbs. Because we'll need, with them, we'll be really much stronger. So we need to be caring, which is an obvious leadership skills usually, so very important. And I do hope like Europe is going to keep that and still pave the way for ambitious climate to stay on Paris aligned.
No, it's a really important point, because we've seen through successive shocks the inflationary pressures are driving prices up, impacting the cost of living crisis. And then climate action is seen as a drag on the public purse in terms of how politically these narratives are playing out. So it's seen as either or, where that's not the case, you need both. And the private sector is a really key, important partner in all of this, because we know there's a financing gap between ambition and, it's been said, but it's worth repeating. We don't have a crisis of ambition. Many governments have the right ambitions. They have the plans. What they don't have is the financing. And the private sector is key in that. What do you see as the role of, how can the corporate sector push through the messy middle? What can they do? What are the innovations you're seeing to help bring that about?
Yeah, Champa, thank you. So actually, I do think there is, I think the ambition point is fair, but there's also a reality of a procrastination point, right? Like we all agree the climate crisis, I think everyone in this room agrees the climate crisis is both important and urgent. I think the urgent question often though gets debated in favor of short-term events like you're describing, cost of living increase, energy crisis, et cetera, which then puts a lot of the policies that would be conducive to private capital coming in on the back burner. That said, I think private sector, private capital, corporate sector will show up where the opportunities are constructed. I'll give you an example. So in the state of Gujarat in India, Gujarat represents 5% of the Indian population, but it has 2/3 of India's rooftop solar installation. So 5% of the population, 2/3 of rooftop solar installation. And it's not because Gujaratis like solar panels. I know a lot of Gujaratis. I think their like for solar is no different than mine. And it's not because solar panels are cheaper or the sun is more accessible in Gujarat. It was purely because of really thoughtful government policy. It was intervention to make sure panels were available, that Gujaratis can sell the energy, excess energy back to the grid, that the installers were credible, reputable, and appropriately serving the market, and that just drove a proliferation of uptake. Right? You look at the other example where we've seen great adoption is in mobility, right? Passenger vehicles, battery electric vehicles, and the capital showed up because both incentives. Now there's a charging network issue, and I think we all know that. But at BCG, we talk a lot about this demand-led transition, right? It's not enough to just produce the cars or produce the heat pumps and people will come. You have to make people want to buy it. And the reason people buy Teslas is not because, some of them do it because they're climate warriors, but many do it. Actually, the climate warriors don't buy cars, but the people who buy the Teslas do it not because they might say there's a climate angle to this, but what they're doing is they're remembering the ad where the Cybertruck was racing a 911 while towing a Cybertruck. And none of the buyers will ever race a 9/11, but in their head, they're gonna do that. Or they see that you could, that all the ads around the Cybertruck being bulletproof, and I live in Canada, we don't have guns. So like there's all these aspects of the vehicles that are marketed and make consumers, and I consider myself a rational consumer. And I do not want to buy a Cybertruck, but every now and then that voice shows up. It's like a little mini Elon Musk saying, hey man, you need a Cybertruck. And I'm like, no, I really don't. Like, no, you should really, your kids will think you're, and it's that kind of demand-led transition, right? Nothing to do with climate, but everything to do to make, same with the solar, same with the BEV. So I think when you have those types of conditions where the private sector is creating product that consumers want, when you have the public sector coming in to enable the proliferation of that product through subsidies, through charging infrastructure, through permitting, which is a big bottleneck, you begin to see it flow. And I think we've got to stop talking at the level of climate and get very specific, mobility, heat, et cetera. And then you can start getting very tangible about what the solutions are. And I'm seeing progress in all different levels of maturity, but I'm seeing progress in all these arenas.
That's fantastic. And as you said, a key enabler is thoughtful government policy. Government also has other tools at their disposal, often fiscal tools such as taxation, levies, bonds. I know the CEO of the European Climate Foundation, Lawrence Toviana, has called for a consumption tax on the rich to address their sizable carbon footprint. How do you think this global wealth tax may play out in practice? In many contexts where new governments, incoming governments are grappling with this issue, how not to raise taxes on working people, and then also impose or create new wealth tax systems in a way that doesn't scare off further investment?
Yeah, I think that the word taxes afraid a lot of people. And when Laurence Toubiana, actually part of the preparation of the new global financing pact, proposed we need to find predictable and at scale financing. And when we look at the kind of what is called the Bridgeton agenda and reform of the World Bank and the MDB, you can leverage money. But just take a few numbers. Just the hurricane that hit the US this summer is $32 billion cost for the US, just to say that. I'm not talking about the other events you were mentioning. So, and when we look at other numbers, we're not talking about tax with kind of citizens, but if you look the amount of subsidies that fossil fuel company received in 2023 was 7 trillion. 7 trillion for 1 year. That would have paid 3-year or development country needs to cope with climate change investment needs, 3 years, in 1 year. They are emitting 75% of the emissions. And they still have made 281 billion benefits the last 2 years. So I think here we have to start talking about, where is the value and how to spread. And the question of inequalities and the polluter paying at the macro level, and of course, society, I was talking about the more vulnerables, but on the big picture, we always think it's difficult, but there are money there. And let's start to think about where the creation of value, and what's value for. Are we going to subsidize these guys and they're making benefits to destroy the value of the nature, to destroy the value of the society, and ultimately to cost? I think there are some estimates about by 2070, the UK kind of cost of impact is going to be 30% of GDP. Is that we're not talking about the cost of inaction. We're talking about, that's the cost of the climate. So first, we have to make sure the subsidies goes to the most vulnerable. But we have to make the polluter pay. So of course, it's going to be difficult because nobody likes taxes. So there's been launch of that global levy, solidarity levy, that has been launched. And the idea is really to work on existing tax, not reinventing the wheels. There's been example in the United Airline tax that bring 3 million to the health. So the point is, airlines, maritime, maybe transaction, financial transaction, to build on what existing. Of course, it's going to be enough to negotiate, but that's where the money lies, to be predictable and at scale. So that's what we want, actually. Now we have 12 countries, and by COP30, we do hope to have more that actually support and commit to implement that. And that's not going to have impact on cost of living of citizens. That may make cry a bit some of the benefits of this company, but what do we want at the end?
No, it's a good point, because I think often the narrative is that it's additive, whereas it could be reorienting, rethinking existing tools and how we might deploy them. The airline levy has raised I think, billions for HIV/AIDS. So we have these models of what has worked before that can be adapted for climate change. Public sector investment, as you say, trillions going towards fossil fuels that could be redirected to other things, but there would still be a financing gap. And Vinay, where do you see the role for private equity working with the public sector investment in order to accelerate the change that we need to see?
Yeah, thank you. And Laurence, I agree that, this idea of, look, if we had a price on carbon, this whole, so much gets resolved, but we're not going to get a global consensus. I think the other challenge with polluter pays, which I'm not challenging, I'm raising what needs to coexist with it is an openness to multilateral trade. Because if suddenly, the single parent who's driving, their kids to school and then first job, second job, third job, night shift, day shift, they need a vehicle. And the affordable vehicle right now are ICE vehicles, unfortunately, right? Like Tesla has not made its vehicles affordable. But in China, BYD has, right? $10,000 battery electric vehicle, which, by the way, doesn't market it as a cheap vehicle. They market it as the vehicle on which you can balance champagne flutes while they're full and go over speed bumps. I'm talking about like making you want to buy that vehicle. Everybody here now wants to go and buy one because you want to go over a speed bump while balancing champagne flutes. That kind of brilliant marketing. But my point is, if we start to close off our borders because of this reversion we're seeing towards protectionism, that polluter pay mindset can suddenly really be the most inflationary for the most vulnerable. And so I agree on redirecting subsidies. I also agree on being a bit more open-minded about this is a global challenge, not a local one, and we've taken too much sometimes of a local mindset on this conversation in some markets. But in terms of private equity, look, I spend a lot of time with sponsors. The people, there's been a massive, massive uptick in the size of new funds. So if you look at the data, I think in 2022 to 2023, fundraising for climate-focused private equity, venture capital, infrastructure funds was 2x, while the broader fundraising market had declined about 40%. So the whole market is declining in terms of fundraising. It was asset owners pulling back saying, no, we won't give you money for this new fund, but if you have a climate fund, please show up. And the reason is that asset owners made these big climate commitments at COP26, net zero 2050. And what quickly became apparent is, that was not very impactful on its own, because all this requires us to do is get rid of the dirty assets and invest in the clean assets. But getting rid of the dirty assets just means those dirty assets get owned by other people who care less about climate change, right? So that just became a very limited impact move. Good to get the global coalition, not enough. What we've seen now is the next wave of private capital waking up and saying, okay, it's not just about getting rid of the bad. We should actually own some of that and decarbonize it. But we also got to invest in the solutions, right? And the biggest challenge we have for founders in this space is lining up the stakeholders you need for first of a kind, right? I have a new technology. I could, if you go to some of these climate startup, Elemental's having one, Breakthrough Energy's having one, and meet some of these founders, and I bet some of you are in this audience. People at the rock face of science and climate are doing some of the most innovative stuff. I met a gentleman last night who's literally pulling water out of air, and can do it at scale. There are people who are building e-fuels for airlines. What the challenge they have, though, is private capital won't show up until you have a proven technology that can scale, a buyer lined up, a management team that they can back that they believe can scale this business, and. And in a country like the US or Canada or Europe, the challenge we have is that you really need to beg all these stakeholders to come together, have a big vision, think big. And while in regions that we're ignoring, China, the Middle East, we're seeing that you're able to bring those stakeholders together a little more easily. I'm not touting one regime over the other. It's not a political point. It's a point about the conditions we need to create the environment for those technologies to scale are hard to create in a market where these stakeholders are taking a very siloed, optimized for myself point of view versus let's come together and scale point of view. And there's not enough of that happening. there's efforts, there's progress, but there's not enough. And that, if we can create that type of environment, I don't think the limiting factor is private capital. There's enough of private capital. I think it's creating the context where those investments can be scaled.
I think it's a really good point. Like, how do we get people to think differently, think big, and be comfortable with that level of risk? Laurence, in your view, what do you think is the role of governments in enabling that environment that Vinay's talking about?
Yeah, there are many aspects. I agree, like putting the stakeholders together, and I think that the new European Commission is one of the key aspects it put forward in the Draghi report, which is precisely that kind of better alignment, better coordination, and actually aligning the different instruments that are available, because there are many of them. I think that there are also other type of leverage. I think, for example, guarantee is a kind of topic that, and if we go back to the international architecture, there have been many attempts there, but not. I mean, there is a group that is being set up to put recommendation forward, because, and having worked in my previous professional life in the development, we've been developing some guarantee scheme with the European Commission, so it's a kind of how fully technical, so there has been a lot of experiments. So there could be some enhancements of the guarantee, because there are a lot of financial technicalities about the risk framework, appetite framework for the development banks, the premium cost, who's making the first loss, etc. So the kind of how to best optimize the public money to leverage and to actually reduce the cost of capital, reduce the risk of the innovation is really something that the government can do. And if I may add just one point, in the international architecture, we have to think about local actors. There are 10% of public money is handled by development public money in the world. And I'm not talking about the MDB, I'm talking about the BNDES in Brazil, the BSA, the China has several banks. So, and we should include these guys in the conversation so that they could actually also, and actually they are part of a financing common group, looking at what means to be Paris aligned, what's the type of mandate you need to have, what the type of financial schemes like guarantee, how to reduce capital costs. And we need to make sure these conversations are also enlarged. When we saw government, we should think about the financial architecture and the national entities that could actually also bring more money with domestic resources.
Absolutely. And to give Vinay the last word, you know, we're hearing about the role government can play. What sort of policy environment do you think, or what are the levers or tools required where businesses are encouraged to innovate without fear of failure or backlash?
Sorry, say the last part again?
What do you see missing in the policy environment that would encourage businesses to take risks, to innovate, scale up, without fear of backlash?
Yeah. Oh, the fear of backlash is so painful, especially in this country. Oh my gosh, it's sent such a chilling effect. Like in the last 2 years, if you look at the conversation in boardrooms on this topic, it's gone from top of the agenda to maybe second and third, but the least talked about topic publicly, because everyone's so afraid of backlash. And that is, frankly, the antithesis of what we need. I think what we need from a policy standpoint, though, is stability, right? I've got to disclose scope 3, I don't have to disclose scope 3. There's going to be a price on carbon, there's going to be a price on carbon. The fact that I can't forecast with certainty, right? I'm going to be required to use e-fuels in my airplanes, I'm not going to be required. The complete policy ping pong we have in this market and others, you know, one of the byproducts of the system is I think having a chilling effect. And here I'll leave you this one stat. We can't let we focus too much now on scaling technologies. 30% of the decarbonization by 2050 is going to come from existing corporates cutting carbon in their stack, and I think too many of them are getting a pass. And I'll just give you one stat on this. We looked at 8 supply chains that represent half the world's emissions. 40% of those emissions can be taken out today with existing technologies in a way that's either profitable or costs less than $10 a ton. The next 40 cost 10 to 100, the last 20 requires innovation. That first 40 is low-hanging fruit. And too few at-scale companies are going after them, and those that are going after them are not going after them fast enough, right? Just look at progress against net zero commitments, who's on the pathway, who isn't. The data is very disappointing. And so that's, I think, the low-hanging fruit. Yes, all this blue sky thinking is immensely important, Champa, and I'm so thrilled that was the focus, but let's also be brilliant at the basics, because that's what's going to be a big part of the outcome we need.
I think that's a good point, a good way to conclude our discussion, because in a way, blue sky thinking is about how you can do things differently with the institutions and the processes you have in place now, not just the new shiny brand new toys in the room. So I just want to thank you both for your insights on reflecting on both what is possible and how to get there as well. And I think I'm going to hand the stage back to our host now, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
All right, how about another round of applause for our fantastic panels? Yes. All right, thank you, everyone. Insights from both Vinay and Lawrence really underscored that this is the year we need to break from the norm and fully embrace the power of innovation in every sense. So that means finance, policy, and collaboration to tackle the climate crisis. Now, the Paris Agreement was a bold step in 2015, but now the enormity of the challenge has also grown since then. And so we'll need to adapt very fast to halt climate change. We will need more blue sky thinking if we're going to disrupt the current pattern of talk, at times with no action. So now our next presenter has really embraced the role of technology in his capacity as president and CEO of Edison International. And it's fantastic to see this theme of thinking outside of the box championed at the very highest level. Please join me in welcoming Pedro Pizarro and Helen Clarkson, CEO of the Climate Group, to the stage.
Pedro, it's great to be sitting here with you. As Jacqueline mentioned in her opening remarks, we know that clean technology is going to play a critical role in the race to decarbonize, but we've got this puzzle about how we get the seeds of innovation to be adequately backed by finance and encouraged by legislation and create that circle. We ran a session yesterday on data centers here. We haven't covered it in much detail before. It comes up all the time. People are always bringing it up to me. Can you talk a bit about that kind of double edge and where you see that going?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, thanks. It's great to be here with you, Helen, and it's wonderful to be able to be part of this. Let me give you some context. When you think about the U.S. electric sector, over the last decade, load growth was fairly flat. It grew about 0.5% a year. 2 years ago, the forecast nationally was for 2.6% load growth over the next 5 years annually. Now that's 4.7%. And you're seeing some states in the country that are seeing 7, 8% load growth rates. There's 3 things driving that.
I was going to say, what's driving? Is it TikTok, Zoom?
Yeah, more than that. So it is data centers and AI.
Yeah.
That's certainly a big factor. Another one, though, is the re-onshoring of manufacturing. So it turns out that legislation works. And so the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Chips and Science Act have brought back manufacturing to the United States. But the third one, and the one that we see principally in California, is electrification, starting with transportation.
Yeah.
Right? In California, about 1/4 of new vehicle sales have an electric plug on them today. Nationally, that number is well over 9%. And so it's those 3 things that are coming together, which means that we need to make sure that the sector can deliver sufficient power. We'll get there, but it is requiring acceleration of development of resources, not only generation, but the grid itself needs investment. You are seeing the delay of retirements of units that were slated for retirement. And importantly, you're seeing the use of new technologies to help amplify the resources we have. But if I had a magic wand to help with all of this, the one thing I would really try and fix is the siting and permitting process, because right now it can take us 10 to 12 years to build a transmission line. And so at a time when load is increasing, we really need the ability to get resources online much faster.
Yeah, and that's one thing we've talked about a lot about Climate Group, that I think people think we need magic bullets, technology. It's like, no, we need to get down and sort out regulation, permitting, siting.
Boring, but really
Boring,
important
boring,
stuff.
yeah.
And it's at the federal, the state, and the local levels. Everything from national level, setting and permitting legislation to how do you do things as mundane as making sure you have the right sort of traffic control when you're doing a project locally.
And in order to get off fossil fuels, the mantra is electrify everything, but this is what goes with it, right?
Absolutely, and so we see that load growth, we've forecasted load growth in California will be at least 80% from today's levels by 2045. You hear some estimates that might be even more, it might be doubling, some say even tripling. So you can't get there without putting in the physical infrastructure.
Yeah. Let's talk about technology though, unless people are worried they're going to talk about permitting for 10 minutes. How is technology helping Edison International to address some of these?
Well, very timely question, because just this morning we released our latest white paper. We've had a series of white papers looking at how the California economy, world's 5th largest economy, can get to net zero by 2045. The white paper is called Reaching Net Zero, and please go find it on the edison.com website. I hope you'll read it. But in it, we extend the analysis that we did last year that looked at the 2045 endpoint and said, yes, net zero is achievable. It will require, to your question, a number of technologies to be developed, right, and amplified. And so we saw a need to add significant amounts of renewable resources and storage, the need to invest in the grid. But as a year went by and we looked at the impact of increasing demand, and then we also looked at the impact of how to actually deploy those technologies, how's that going? We're seeing that there are pressures there. California also has a 2030 interim goal. That's looking very challenged to meet. And so a lot of our message is, let's make sure we have the right sort of push on accelerating these technologies so that they are there in place in time for 2045. One particular item that we looked at is, we're looking at not only at just getting greenhouse gas reduction, but also keeping a grid that is balanced and can deliver power reliably and resiliently. And so for that, solar and storage get a lot of focus. We're big believers in that. It's a big part of the equation, necessary but not sufficient. And so we need other technologies, and in particular, we focus on clean, firm generation, right? Clean, but firm means that it's available 24/7 or on demand. Now, solar paired with storage can do that, but it requires a lot of land. So if we were to rely exclusively on solar and storage for California, we would need to cover new landmass the size of the Los Angeles metropolitan area to do it just with solar and storage. In contrast, if you look at clean, firm resources, these could be next generation geothermal, small modular reactors, clean hydrogen, or gas resources paired with carbon capture and storage. On average, to get the same greenhouse gas reductions, 1 gigawatt of those clean, firm resources are equivalent to 7 to 11 gigawatts of solar and paired storage. So there's an efficiency argument there in terms of land use and resource use. So we're putting a big premium in this paper, making sure that those resources, get developed, get the support that they need. And again, back to the siting and permitting question, right? That they get the permits, but also that the transmission infrastructure that's needed is able to come online to make all of this work.
How do you balance, those investments between proven technologies, so solar, wind, and that kind of stuff, and then these new emerging technologies which have so much more uncertainty around them?
You need it all, right?
Yeah.
And right now, particularly with the demand rise that we're seeing across the country, you're seeing a number of utilities making choices today that are based on what supply chain is available, right? What can we go get off the shelf right now? At the same time, you see the industry investing significantly in new generation of technologies. In our case at Edison, we do that several ways. Our Southern California Edison utility is signing power purchase agreements with some of these longer term resources. At the holding company, we have a small group that's investing, making early stage investments in new companies that are pursuing new technologies. And then our TRIO advisory business, which is a non-utility business that works with something like 50 of the largest companies globally. Well, we're advising those companies and how they're accessing some of these new resources. So it really takes all of the above.
Yeah, and so at the same time, how are you mitigating the risk? Because the risk is grid instability, right? So how are you playing the risk side of it in?
Absolutely. And also looking at the cost implications of all of this, right? And so one of the big focus areas for us is how do we make sure that this is an affordable transition that's also equitable, right? We can't be leaving different groups behind. And we see a significant need for investment here on the electric side. We estimated last year that in California alone, the investments needed for renewables and storage will be something like $250 billion. Another $125 billion for the transmission wires to connect all that. That will put some added pressure on electric rates. However, there's good news in that the end-use technologies, right, electric technologies that are going to be replacing fossil fuel technologies. So shifting from your gasoline car to an electric car, from a physics perspective, that uses a lot less energy per mile, right? That efficiency driver adds up, and it means that we see the average Southern California Edison customer will be spending more in electricity in 2045, and they'll be using more electricity, but their total energy bill, electric plus gas plus gasoline, will be 40% lower in real terms than it is today.
That's great.
The share of wallet that goes to energy will go from an average of 7% today to 3% in 2045. So this transition, yes, it's getting us to net zero on the carbon side. Yes, it's providing local air quality benefits, and it's also providing economic benefits to the customer.
And do you think they're seeing that? Do they recognize that? We've had a few years of real uncertainty around energy prices. We can see our own bills going up. How's that playing through?
It's a big part of our advocacy. And so I think we need to continue to educate our customers, our regulators, policymakers, so that we don't lose heart in continuing to push for the transition that we so much need.
Great. One last thing. Theme this week is it's time. So maybe what are you working on? What's it kind of the urgent action that you're doing right now?
Get moving, because the cost of inaction is much higher than the cost of action.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about climate change mitigation through these kind of resources, but I'd also advocate for climate change adaptation, recognizing that there's a level of climate change that's already baked in. And so we're seeing it in things like, more extreme wildfire seasons, more extreme heat, more floods, more droughts. So as a global economy, we need to be making the investments today, fast, in a hurry, urgently, to help bend the curve down in terms of climate change mitigation, but also adapt to what's coming.
Fantastic. Please join me in thanking Pedro for his time and leadership on yours. Thank you. Thanks. I'm staying here. So now we're going to move on to our next panel, which is on AI, a buzzword we're hearing a lot about this week, but it's not just a buzzword, it's a technology that's really taken the world by storm, and climate is not exempt. We think it's a game changer, it could revolutionize things, but for others, there's a lot of discussion around how energy intensive it is and how we balance that additional emissions. So in order to unpack this, please join me in welcoming my panelists to the stage. So we have Melissa Schwab, the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Nokia, Nitesh Banga, President and CEO at Global Logic, a Hitachi company, and Blair Sweden, Global Head of Net Zero and Sustainability at Meta.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Shuffle around. Hi. So let's start positively. It's always a good place to start. Power of artificial intelligence hailed as a key tool for fast-tracking climate action. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on the kind of immediate, impactful applications of AI to help businesses and governments on their journey to net zero. So Blair, let's start with you. Tell us about the work you lead in net zero and sustainability at Meta and how AI is part of that.
Sure. So Blair Sweden, I lead net zero and sustainability at Meta. I've been at the company for about 10 years and on a number of different initiatives, including leading the data science strategy team. And so I've been leading net zero and sustainability for the last couple of years. And when it comes to AI, I've been fortunate to see a number of different places across the business where AI has been very impactful. And it's exciting to see that now be applied on climate solutions. And so We fully recognize and embrace the challenge that we're all faced with around climate and are committed to the change, to fighting change and trying to contribute however we can. And with AI, we've been able to leverage open source AI models and developing those in partnership with, for example, the World Resource Institute. We developed an open forest canopy height model to be able to measure really the height of any tree in the world. And the way that that can be used is to validate conservation efforts, reforestation efforts. It's also used for validating carbon credit projects. Another example is applying AI to novel formulations of concrete to reduce the carbon footprint in use in our data centers. And so that approach has reduced the carbon footprint of that concrete by about 40%. So those are a couple of examples, and then we open source those to make them available to the broader community.
Great. Melissa, where do you see Nokia's role in accelerating the efforts?
Thank you, and hello, everybody. First of all, many of you perhaps think of Nokia as a handset company, but we are no longer in the handset business. So Nokia today is a world-leading technology innovation company that delivers networks that sense, think, and act. And our role in developing AI is really twofold. First is Nokia Bell Labs. So many of you perhaps have heard of Bell Labs, amazing research organization that developed some of the most important technology developments in the world, including the transistor as well as solar panels. So our researchers at Nokia Bell Labs are working on AI decarbonization solutions. And then secondly, we help our customers, which are either, they run the gamut from manufacturing to energy companies to really embed AI in their networks, essentially to do two things: to create more energy efficiency, so being very simplistic, to be able to turn networks up and down depending on what resource and energy resource they need, and then also on the resource side. So one of our main factories, which is in Oulu in the north of Finland, since we digitized and used AI for that facility, for example, we've increased output by 250% and kept energy usage flat. So those are just a few examples. But bottom line, we can't realize all the benefits of AI without the network, and that's what Nokia today does.
Thank you. Nitesh, how do you see AI's role evolving in terms of tangible outcomes, and can you just share some specific AI-driven solutions that Global Logic is working on?
Yeah, I think Global Logic is part of Hitachi, of course. So Hitachi is into a lot of sustainable solutions, whether it is smarter trains, whether it's smarter energy infrastructure. But from a Global Logic perspective, we work with customers across the spectrum, whether it's technology customers to software-defined vehicles to medical technologies to digital banks and so on. But the way we look at it is the endpoint of the consumer, because what we are developing is digital platforms, products, and services. And the way we think is that how do we make it more efficient? How do we make it more responsible? How do we make it more sustainable? And that's really how we are taking it to market. So for example, when we think about electrifying fleets, when we think about making sure that autonomous warehousing is more sustainable for palletization, depalletization, when we think about digital twins, when we think about autonomous networks, as Melissa was saying. So those are the kind of solutions that we are actually taking to market for our customers and for the consumers. Yeah. I feel like Global Logic is touching 8 billion people every day, right? On something that you do, whether it is wayfinding on your maps, or whether it is driving a software-defined vehicle, an electric vehicle, or whether you are watching streaming software on your app. So those are the kind of things that we're doing.
Great. Good. So we've covered some of the positive and exciting things. Let's talk about energy demand and responsible AI. And Blair, I'll start with you again. So we know that these are energy, resource-intensive systems, especially when you apply them at large scales. We've heard a lot about data centers. I'm sure you get asked about this a lot. So can you talk about how Meta's working to balance the energy demands of AI and the potential to decarbonize, and what steps you're taking to make sure that it's sustainable?
Sure. So I think it's a unique opportunity at this time for innovation, and it will require collaboration and partnership across a number of different players. It's not unique just to the constraints around energy and resources are not unique to Meta or any one company, but certainly we acknowledge that that is something that we continue to dig into, as we have been doing on sustainability for many, many years. And so if we look at the ways that we're focused on our sustainability today, some of the things we've done, we've been scope 1 and 2 net zero since 2020. We have a very ambitious net zero value chain goal in 2030, as well as a water positive goal in 2030. On our data centers are some of the most sustainable data centers in the world. All of our operational data centers are at least LEED Gold certified, and we continue to innovate and make progress on reducing the environmental impact of those. So more to be done, but we're very excited about the progress that we've been able to make to date. And then lastly, I would say the open sourcing of AI in general and models. There's a lot of efficiency gains to be gained through taking that approach, and that's in the DNA of our company, is really around open source, and we believe that there's a lot to be gained by that.
Great. Nitesh, as AI innovations accelerate, how do we balance these rapid technological advancements with need for responsible development and deployment of the technologies?
Yeah, I think it starts from responsible design, right? Anything that you do from a perspective of a next generation product, platform, or service, which we are all consumers of, right? I think we need to think about responsible design, right? How do we responsibly design an app? How do we make sure that data is responsibly used, right? Many times we are, I joke all the time, right? Like every 2 days, Apple will call me and say, hey, you know what? Your data is already out of limit, and now you need to get the next terabyte and the next terabyte. But the fact is, like, are we doing responsibly all of those things?
You mean when I send like a one emoji to someone,
yes.
It's not responsible? Yeah.
I think so. So the point is, like, how do you think about, like, whenever, because we are a B2B company, we're not so much of B2C, but how do you look at the consumers and what they are doing with those kind of things, and that's really what we are focused on, right? Like, whenever we are talking about a next generation vehicle or a next generation autonomous robot in the warehouse, these are the things that we are doing. Can we palletize in a good way when you guys are all sending your order online, right? That's what we are thinking, like, how do we make sure that these orders are, responsibly packaged? How do we make sure that only one trip is made as opposed to 5? So those are the kind of things that we are really looking for, right? Like, to make sure that responsibility is in each of us.
Yeah.
And that's very important.
Great, thank you. Melissa, how do you see the trade-offs between AI's resource consumption and the potential for reducing it? And are there efforts to make AI more energy efficient?
Yeah, so that's such an important word, right? Responsibility, and a big word that we all need to live up to. One thing that we are focused on as Nokia is working to really figure out how to measure the impact of our AI framework, so our footprint. So we've just actually released a framework on how to do that, which you can find more information on the website. But it goes exactly to the point of, as we all know, if you can actually measure something, then you can act on it, right? If we have the data, then we can help act on it and make things a lot better. So we're really proud of that work that we've just released, and it can help on everything from energy efficiency to, as you talked about, data centers as well. You know, if you can measure it, then you have the capability to potentially shift to renewable energy, for example. So bottom line, if one can measure it effectively, then we can act, and that's obviously important for everybody here today in this room.
Great, and let's talk about access to AI, and like you already mentioned, you know, open source. How is that open source approach helping to contribute to the kind of rapid uptake and deployment?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, open source is a big foundational part of our strategy and really integral to the DNA of the company. We've been open source really since the beginning, not just on AI, but just another example is the Open Compute project, which was open sourcing the designs around building data centers and the hardware that goes in those data centers. And the benefits of open sourcing are better products, safer products, faster innovation, as well as growing the market for those solutions. And so we see the same opportunity with AI, and we're committed to an open, thriving AI ecosystem where you democratize the access to those models rather than having them concentrated with just the companies with the compute to be able to train those models, put it in the hands of the organizations and developers and others who are going to be able to benefit from that. And so, again, great benefits from efficiency gains, quality, safety that come from the open source approach. At least that's our belief.
And is there any debate about that within the company, or is that just sort of hardwired into the approach? Like, how does that, is that a philosophy that the company shares? Or?
It's interesting from an engineer perspective. It's like everybody wants to open source everything, and you kind of have to slow it down. Let's think about this. But no, it is definitely integral to the way that we've approached things from the beginning. And on AI, our AI research group was founded in 2015. And open source PyTorch, for example, that was all integral to the strategy from the very beginning. So it's definitely the default, and it's also somewhat contrarian when you look at some of the other approaches.
Yeah. Melissa, talk a bit about how we're going to ensure the equitable use of AI and again, democratize it again across promising applications and so on.
Sure. So I'll start with just a reminder for people. In the event you're not aware, but there are 2.6 billion, I'll repeat, 2.6 billion people who don't have access to connectivity. Yeah. So that's a little bit of in some ways, a first world problem. So first of all, we need to get everybody online and give them access. That's really, really important. And then also important is making sure that there's a long-term commitment. I'll go back to your words of the use of the word responsible, how important that is. We recently developed a set of guiding principles, and it includes a lot of the things you would expect: sustainability, accountability. But one thing where we spent a lot of time was on the concept of fairness, and how do we make sure that there aren't bias in AI models. We think that's a really important point. And something where we really, again, just spent a lot of time and energy making sure that was considered and included. And it's always evolving, right? You need to continue to do that. And similar to what you said, we all know technology alone won't solve the problem. We all need to come together. Nokia's purpose is to create technology that helps the world act together. And so it's forums like this where we're sharing and comparing notes and working together, just as you said, Blair, to solve these challenges is really, really important.
It's interesting hearing this and thinking, where's that line between collaboration and competition, and how are the companies, because we know there's a lot of collaboration on the kind of energy side. I just want to kind of come back to both of you. How's that working in terms of collaborating, competing?
Yeah, it's something that we've talked about a lot because it's unique in this space, because we collaborate a lot with who might be considered competitors in other domains. But in this domain, it's about collaborating to move more quickly. The urgency of the situation. Also, if you think about what you have to do, for example, for Scope 3 and getting your whole supply chain decarbonized, to be able to accomplish that, you need to collaborate in a way that all those suppliers, all those companies don't need to do something different for every single customer that they have. And so coming together and collaborating in a number of different forums is core to the strategy and around net zero and sustainability, as it is for many other peer companies.
Yeah. If I can just add,
Yes,
for us, similar to your achievements on scope 1 and 2, everything within our control, we're addressing, we're doing well. I'm proud of the work that we're doing. Scope 3, which accounts for more than 90% of the emissions, which is our customers' emissions, is really challenging.
Yeah.
So we feel that the more we can work together and help lead and collaborate, the better. Because if not, we can't achieve our targets, and then our customers can't achieve theirs, and so on and so on.
Great. And Nitesh, I was going to turn to you. Maybe add on that, and then I'll ask my question.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think the way we think about it is that at an end point, right? Because the way we work is, B2B, but at the end of the day, most of our customers are B2C. The concept is like, if you are going to summarize a book on OpenAI or Gemini or Llama or whatever, right? The point is, how do you do tokenization, right? How do you make sure that you create a platform? And that's what we've done, right? We've actually launched a GenAI platform where you do tokenization, which is based on what your use case is, right? And how do you make it more efficient? Because at the end of the day, all of us need to be responsible, and it starts from us, from a perspective of launching these use cases. And I think, so I think the FinOps on leveraging LLMs is extremely important, right? Like, I think that's really one of the use cases that we've taken to market, where we say, okay, based on your use case, we're gonna make sure that how much of the LLMs you are utilizing is really up to us. And those are some of the things that we're trying to do. And that kind of creates efficiency, that kind of creates acceleration, and hence sustainability.
Great. And my next question to you is about trends, actually. So what trends are you seeing in terms of investment in hyperscaling AI technologies?
I think a lot of investment is going in, first of all, making AI more intelligent. I think it's called artificial intelligence.
Should we be worrying about that? Should I worry about it?
Not really.
Okay,
I think if you really think about it, right, like we are all using LLMs today, but if you think about AI, it's pretty dumb actually. That's what I think, right? A hand has
AI is pretty dumb. That's
yes. A hand has 5 fingers. We all know that, but AI does not know that. But it will tell you that a hand has 5 fingers, right? Because there is so much inference data that is all around there that it is able to relate that a hand, 5, and fingers, right? And that it connects and says that a hand has 5 fingers, right? So those are the kind of things that are happening right now. And I think that what we really need to do is to actually leverage and harness that power to apply to advantages that we are doing. When we're talking about digital twins, for example, like digital twins were 15 years ago, I went to Boeing and I told them that I'm going to create a digital twin for you. So they came and they showed me this big paper which had a part on it, which was probably designed by somebody 100 years ago for 747. And they said, can you please create a digital twin for that? And of course I could not, because the technology just wasn't there. But today it's there, right? Like, you could actually take that paper and convert that into a digital expression and then create a digital twin on it, which can leverage AI and hence create a predictive maintenance perspective on it. And I think those are the kind of powers that we need to leverage. And hence, when you create a digital twin, the amount of responsibility that you are putting on the planet is huge, right? The sustainability that you're putting is huge. So that's the kind of stuff that I think we should do.
Great. And how do you think the private sector can prioritize investments in technologies that are accelerating climate action?
I really believe that at the end of the day, it's about acceleration and efficiency. Private sector is all about, making things faster, making things cheaper, making things better for their customers. And whenever you look at those kind of principles, at the end of the day, it connects to sustainability. That's how I look at it, right? Like, if you are consuming an app which is more responsible, I think you'll be fine because that's what you want because it's going to be cheaper, right? So I think from a private sector perspective, we believe very strongly that as long as you are making things more accelerated, as long as you're making things more efficient, I think it is end state, it'll be more sustainable. And that's what it is, right? Like as I was telling you, right? We are talking about route algorithms for fleets, right? When you go to Amazon and Amazon says that, hey, why would you not order these two things together because I can deliver it for you in one trip instead of 5, right? Those are the kind of things, right? Amazon wins, the consumer wins, and we as providers of those platforms win, right? So I think those are the things that I think, as long as it's efficient, as long as it's accelerated, I'm quite sure it'll be responsible.
Your optimism is very infectious on this. I think someone who's sort of AI scared over here. Looking ahead, how are you all prioritizing sustainability and climate considerations as you develop AI, and what is that role of AI-driven technologies? Melissa, let's start.
Sure. So 2 years ago, we announced an updated corporate strategy for Nokia, including a new brand, in case you guys haven't seen our new Nokia brand. But we have 6 pillars and 4 enablers. The brand is one enabler, our people are another enabler, but pillar number 6 is ESG as a competitive advantage. So we have all of our resources at Nokia focused on how do we flip that, right? How do we move it from this is important to do, nice to do, good for the planet, to actually a competitive advantage. So that's a big focus for our team, and we are taking it seriously and working really hard on how do we do that, because I think that's comes the next horizon, instead of nice to do, but actually helping move the needle.
Great. I had a question about whether you think you can do that, because what's the difference between American and European companies in that sort of way of thinking? Because it might be a surprise to the audience here to hear ESG as a competitive advantage when some people are like, we can't talk about it.
Yes, yeah, and it's you always have to be true to who you are, who your company is, who your culture is. It's always really important. But yeah, it is very true to who Nokia is as a company, global company, headquartered in Finland, but we operate in 130 countries around the world. So I wouldn't say we consider ourselves, of course we're Finnish, but we're also global.
Yeah.
So everything that we do is from a global mindset. But to the earlier conversation around, we need to push and we need to move forward. So the more we can do on product energy efficiency, for example, the better, because it helps our customers. As Blair was saying, how do we get those Scope 3 numbers down? So it's critical, we understand, and it has full support, not only from the CEO, but of course the board. So yeah, we're in it.
Great. Blair, sorry, moving to you on that question about prioritizing sustainability and climate as you develop AI, and how it's going to help you get to net zero.
Yeah, sure. So I'd say starting with energy. So today we match all of our energy consumption with new clean and renewables added to the grid. And so that's something that we continue to invest in heavily. So that's kind of on the Scope 2 side. The second is innovating in the way that we deliver our services, whether that's on the data center side, alternative materials. I mean, I think to the point about efficiency, the good news is a lot of the carbon reducing opportunities are aligned with cost savings. Not all of them. I mean, there are green premium items as well. And so we have a very structured strategy and approach for how we're approaching decarbonizing and then removing the residual emissions we're not able to reduce. But that's on the kind of squarely in the net zero and sustainability side. And then I'd say on the AI side of the house, there's also the continued improvement around Llama. We're on Llama 3 right now. And if you look at, for example, mini models versus macro models. Mini models, you don't need to, it can be a purpose-built model with a smaller data set that's very focused on a given set of domain or answers. And so as that specialization increases, that will also increase the efficiency. There'll be a natural efficiency built into the way that technology proliferates over time. And that's very much, again, in line with empowering those with those models in an open source model so that they can tailor that to their needs and their use cases.
Great. Nitesh.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, like, as Blair mentioned, right, like, it's really about, starting from AI-powered network, right, to an AI-powered LLM. At the end of the day, the whole idea is how do you make use cases which are more efficient, right? All the way from a digital twin to a autonomous car to an autonomous warehouse to a digital bank to a medtech device, right? At the end of the day, the idea is how do we make these things more efficient, leveraging AI, and make it more accelerated to the consumer, leveraging AI. As long as we are doing that, I mean, like, we're talking about software-defined storage, for example, right? We talked about data center. The idea is, like, when you are, creating a data center which is software-defined, when you're creating a factory that is software-defined, when you're using a 5G network in a digital factory, I think all of these things are leveraging AI to deliver, end use cases which are more efficient. And as long as we are more efficient, I believe we are more sustainable. And that's really, I feel, most important.
Great, thank you. I hope our audience feels the optimism from you. I was going to say good for the climate, bad for the climate. You're all going to say good for the climate. But thank you very much for giving us an insight into why hopefully AI as a technology can really help us get to net zero. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you very much to Helen. AI is a fascinating topic and can be quite controversial at times, right? But I'm pleased that we're unable to unpack it in such a transparent way and really understand how best to leverage it to our advantage as folks who are serious about tackling climate change. And actually, the company that I work for, Pelmerex Media in Canada, that owns the Weather Network, is really spearheading the development of AI in-house, and that's going to better equip our weather models to better prepare Canadians and really people across the world. So I'm such a fan of tech, so I'm pleased that we'll be sticking with the topic of technology for our last talk of the day, but we'll discuss how we actually fund it, right? That's an important part. I read that funding required to scale climate tech is up 5 times higher than other high-growth, high-tech sectors. So how do we bridge the gap to bankability for some of the tech we'll come to rely on? So joining me on stage to explore this is Steve Campana, the Director of Technology Policy for the U.S. Department of Energy, and Andy Cooper, the founder and CEO of Leapfrog Investments. Put your hands together.
Go all the way across?
Perfect.
No.
Musical chairs. All right, thank you very much, both of you, for joining this. I think we're all pretty excited about this conversation. So I guess I'll start with you, Steve. I'll come to you first with climate tech requiring, like we said, 5 times the funding compared to other high-tech sectors. What specific strategies is the Department of Energy implementing to help scale climate tech businesses and attract more private investment?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'll start by saying that we are making quite a bit of progress since the Biden administration. There's been more than $500 billion invested in clean energy and climate technologies in the United States, and most of that is coming from the private sector. It's about, for every dollar the government is spending, about $6 coming from the private sector. So there's a real catalytic effect there, a real multiplier effect that I think is very productive. But at DOE, after the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, it really changed our focus from being more of an early stage R&D organization to going all the way through deployment, demonstration, commercialization. And with that has come a focus on better partnership with the private sector. I think there are a couple of examples of how that's happening. One which is sort of a more traditional focus is our loan program office, which has unlocked right now, has loan guarantees over the course of the administration for $33 billion worth of programs across 24 different agreements, and with a really long queue still there, so about $300 billion in potential projects that are just waiting for approval. So there's obviously huge demand there, a lot of an untapped market. Another thing that I'd mention, though, is we're thinking about ways to not only do our traditional financing of building projects, but also creating the demand for those projects. So under the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, we got $8 billion for hydrogen hubs, clean hydrogen hubs. We decided to put $7 billion of that into building the hubs, into the partnerships, but about $1 billion of it we set aside to build demand for clean hydrogen. One of the big problems with clean hydrogen is the incumbent technology is already there and it's pretty cheap, and clean hydrogen right now is not. And so it's really hard to get sort of long-term offtake agreements into the market because people are anticipating the cost is going to come down and the incumbent technology is so cheap. So we are working with a private consortia to identify strategies that can help build that market. Things like reverse auctions, where there's going to be a guarantee that the producers will get a certain price.
Thank you. Okay, Andrew, given the funding gap for climate tech is 5 times higher than other high growth sectors, how can impact investors like Leapfrog Investments play a pivotal role in bridging this gap? And what strategies have you seen succeed in mobilizing capital towards climate tech at scale?
Well, certainly I'm here as the private sector piece, and especially we focus on developing countries, Asia and Africa mostly. And we've really led the impact investing movement with some others to be a group that commands over $1 trillion now, focused on high impact businesses, businesses that serve people with essential services. Much of the industry now is turning towards how we can find these climate solutions that are super scalable, because if you have 5 billion low-income people in emerging markets who don't have time to waste, you really need to roll out things quickly, and that requires technology. The very exciting thing is that a number of technologies have passed the price tipping point. So, for example, we have a report out, it's on the Leapfrog Investments website, but it's with Temasek and others like Mahindra, focused on which technologies have reached what we call the green discount, where they're actually cheaper than the incumbent alternatives. Examples would be rooftop solar, electric vehicles, especially two-wheelers and three-wheelers in the likes of India or Nigeria or Kenya. And in all these cases, there are businesses that are providing these at scale. And I know that because we're invested in those businesses and own a chunk of them. So, for example, you have Sun King in Africa, where if you look at that map at night, it's tended to be quite dark because the grids are poor. In Africa, well, Sun King has rolled out to reach nearly 100 million people with solar lanterns, solar home systems, etc., that it gives them autonomy over their own lives and is actually cheaper as long as you can provide some financing up front. And we were involved in the $250 million round with General Atlantic into that. Another one, just one more example, was in India, Battery Smart that we've invested in. Instead of, it's basically lowered the cost of acquiring a 2- or 3-wheeler, which is what most people have, little scooters or motorbikes or e-rickshaws, by 30 to 40%, because instead of the ICE engine that you have, the internal combustion engine, you have batteries, but the batteries you don't have to buy with the vehicle up front. It's batteries as a service. So you drive into the little swap station, and in 2 minutes your battery gets taken out, new battery gets put in. It's cheaper than filling up with gas or petrol, and off you go. So this company has done 45 million battery swaps and is massively scaling electric vehicle adoption in India. And if you want to know, compared to the UK, it's about 100 times as many vehicles enter the roads in India. So unless we get this right in the developing world, even if the wealthy world hits all its targets, we're all in a lot of trouble. We're going to be at something like 2.8 degrees of catastrophic warming. So this thing of how do we get people to adopt these technologies in their billions in emerging markets actually over time is going to be central to whether all of us survive in the present world.
Innovative, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I'll go back to you, Steve. How is the Department of Energy working to ensure that marginalized communities have equitable access to the benefits of climate tech, both in terms of job creation and the deployment of sustainable technologies?
Sure. So in his first week as president, President Biden issued an executive order announcing the Justice 40 initiative, which directed agencies to direct at least 40% of the benefits, not just 40% of the investment, but 40% of the benefits to underserved and marginalized communities for specific types of investments. So things like clean energy and energy efficiency and climate technology. And that's really been embedded into the fabric of how we do business now at DOE. So we now have changed our processes, excuse me, for reviewing applications for all the funding that goes out the door. We now ask for a community benefits plan and make sure that there's a real workforce engagement plan to make sure that the communities are being brought along, not just and benefiting from the investments that are being made. And these are specific selection criteria. About 20% of the scoring criteria for these projects are based on how good their workforce development, their community engagement, their training programs are. And then that's built into the contract too. So we're holding them accountable for it once we give them the money and really making sure that they do that. I'll also take a moment to give Congress a little bit of credit too, which they don't always get, because under the Inflation Reduction Act, there are bonuses in place for making extra, for tax credits for investing in energy communities. There are set-asides for specific energy communities that are focused, that have historically been reliant on fossil fuels. And it's made a real difference. Before the Inflation Reduction Act, these energy communities were getting about $2 billion per month in clean electricity investment. After the Inflation Reduction Act, it's $4.5 billion. So it's really making a giant difference.
Mm-hmm. The potential for climate tech to significantly alter industries and economies. How can we avoid creating or exacerbating inequalities in excess to these technologies? What strategies do leapfrog investments, Andy, employ to ensure that the transition to a low carbon economy is inclusive?
You're absolutely right that exclusion from use of these technologies often at all is at the heart of what it is to be low income and what it is to be the vast majority of people in Africa and emerging Asia. So the question is, what technologies really helped people? And here, relying on slow grid systems to be built out or on traditional methodologies is a mistake, because we have incredible leapfrogging technologies that can allow people to move into a completely different space. So for example, you can have AI and algorithmic underwriting that allows people to build credit scores where previously they haven't. That allows them to then get financing to pay for the solar. There are multiple kinds of technologies that are now being rolled out across our markets by our companies. And just to give you a sense, today, Leapfrog's companies serve 588 million people, nearly 10% of the world's low-income population, and that was from a standing start. But just in the last quarter, our companies reached 50 million new people who didn't previously have certain essential services, the vast majority of them. So this is not hypothetical. This is not that the tech isn't there yet, that you're taking major tech risk as an investor. In fact, it's a tremendous opportunity. We've raised over $1 billion for all of this in the recent times, and a number of other major private equity groups are raising billions and billions of dollars to go into this space. So it is the moment, really, of profit with purpose, and we are all, I think, very privileged to live at a moment where the technology tipping point has been achieved, not in all areas, hydrogen being an example, but in a whole bunch of areas: built environment, agriculture and food, certain areas, mobility and transport, and clean energy. In all those areas, the green tipping point has passed. There are green discounts to be had. So you're not backing some hortatory, exciting thing people ought to do. You're backing human nature. People want cleaner, cheaper, better products and services. It's available via these technologies, and as an investor, you can get behind these companies, do tremendously well, and really achieve profit with purpose.
It's a difficult to be alive at this time, but it's a wonderful time to be alive at this time, the same breath. I have one final question to pose to both of you. I'll come back to you, actually, Andy, first, and then to you, Steve. As new climate technologies emerge, how can we balance the need for swift regulatory approval with ensuring that these innovations meet the necessary safety and sustainability standards?
We find this an important challenge in our markets because they tend to be under-regulated in a number of areas. So there is an opportunity based on that to work closely with government and with policymakers to come up with effective mechanisms that don't actually impair the ability to roll out these technologies fast. And we find that there's a lot of engagement around this. But I would say that the view on privacy can be quite different in developing markets where people are ready to trade off some privacy in order to get access rapidly to empowering goods and services. So to the extent that they can lower the price by providing some information about themselves and can actually get into the economy and be starting to be accessed by sellers, people are more willing to do that. And as a result, we see less of a trade-off in the developing world in this area. We do think that there is an enormous opportunity to create enabling environments for the rollout of financial inclusion products like the financing I spoke about, insurance, which is a heavily regulated industry, but also for clean tech. And collaboration among regulators and with business to make this happen. We don't have the legacy systems often that the US and other countries do. And so there is an opportunity not to be hobbled by that, but again, to leapfrog to a different kind of more enabling architecture with less in the way.
Yeah, I would say, I think obviously developing new technologies and making sure that they live up to the safety standards that we expect is really important. I'd also say that a big barrier is deploying existing technologies as rapidly as we possibly can. I think we're seeing challenges in getting those technologies out the door as quickly as we need to. When you look at interconnection queues and the difficulty we have building transmission, and sort of the permitting process in the United States needs to be improved. It's very Byzantine, it takes a long time, and we know that needs to be improved, and that's sort of the way that we'll be able to get these climate techs out. For the new technologies, I think we can't ignore communities. We do need to continue to work with communities. I think a lot of communities have a very well-earned distrust of some traditional energy companies and energy technologies, and we really want to make sure we don't repeat those mistakes by making sure that we're working with them, helping them understand whatever environmental impacts there might be, and also the economic benefits that can accrue with these investments.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. That was a wonderful discussion. We are out of time, but maybe a big round of applause for both Steve and Andrew. Thank you both. This brings us to the end of our flagship discussions at the Hub Live, where we covered climate leadership and ambition, climate finance, and sustainable development, before pivoting to climate technology and innovation, all huge topics where there is so much still to unpack. So we will be hosting a plethora of exciting thematic sessions from 11 a.m. to 4:40 p.m. In our stream rooms: nature, food and health, energy and transport transition, the new industrial revolution, leadership and green growth. We'll be looking at everything from national climate action plans and climate and its impact on health to 24/7 carbon-free electricity and low-emission steel supply chains. We also have a number of sessions dedicated to exploring the Inflation Reduction Act and its impact on Latino communities. So there's really, truly something for everyone. We will go to break now and rejoin in the thematic session rooms at 11 a.m. See you soon, and thank you, everyone.